Welcome to the 27th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, still recording from home, we'll be discussing how you can start your career, and that's in air quotes there, as a game master for RPGs. This episode of the GameFor Podcast is brought to you by TurboDork, radical paints to make your gray world colorful. I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And we're part of the team behind GameFor, the app for connecting tabletop gamers. Currently, getting together as tabletop gamers is not something we should be doing. We are starting to see some states starting to open some things up. I know, like our local game stores are open, but not really still having in-game, in-store events is what I'm trying to say. So, but you can still find your local stores and that kind of stuff in the GameFor app. And we're still doing the podcast because we want to help people build communities so that when we can get back together, we'll have people to play with.
Exactly.
What kind of hobby stuff have you been doing since the last episode?
I'm starting to play Imperial Assault again, the campaign mode.
From Fantasy Flight, the Star Wars thing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Jason, one of the guys from GameFor, is and some of his friends are all playing. He's been playing with settings and stuff. So we had like a session last week where we went through the tutorials so that we could all kind of remember how to play. And he was kind of playing around with setting up the camera so he could see down. We were using Google Meet. First time I've used Google Meet for this rather than Discord. It was kind of nice because since it was just a link, I also sent myself the link, and then everyone else started doing it as well. And then just had my phone with the camera on one of our phone holders from work.
Yep.
Kind of overlooking my dice tray so that you could see them roll. Even though it wasn't kind of worried about people cheating, we found that it was actually more fun to be able to actually see the rolls because we could all kind of react at the same time versus the person, like, you hear the sound and then you hear them kind of react, and then they're like, and I got this, this, and this,
right?
Especially since they're not like a single number, they're like, all the different symbols and stuff for the game. So
yeah, that's true. It's like custom dice, and you guys are playing, like, he's got the camera top down over the board. Jason does, and then everybody else, instead of having the camera pointing at your faces, or do you have multiple?
We have ones pointed at our faces so we can kind of see each other, and then we've kind of all hooked up our phones as well, so we have kind of a second camera that's pointed
on
at
like a second account. Is that how you're doing it?
Yeah, well, you don't actually have to have an account. You just have to have the link for the.
That's right.
Yeah, so it worked out actually really well.
That's a smart idea. Yeah, because then you could have, hey, you're right. You could have your laptop or whatever, your desktop computer, and that's
right. So everyone
one way to log in, and then
talked, and
you
just mute your other one so you don't get the echo,
the feedback.
Right, and then you've got kind of that second camera approach, which turned out to be a lot easier than we thought.
Especially for the dice rolling, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna possibly look at doing that for other stuff down too. But yeah, I really liked it.
You should write an article about it for your blog.
I should. I've been meaning to get back to my blog. I need to get back to my blog. And then actually we had to get the special dice. Looked around, and none of my local game stores had any in stock. But one of them, they had just got a new inventory system that connected their other store. So the manager was able to actually see that there was inventory about an hour away from us at the other store. So we went down. Jason and I went down there for that. He was looking at getting expansions, and we found out that they were having like a 50% off sale on their like scratch and dents and overstock, which is usually the stuff that is brought to all the conventions. But because
this particular store owner usually goes pretty heavy at Gen Con.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I whenever I'm at a convention he's at, I always find something to pick up. So it was kind of like, we were kind of done, almost ready to check out, and he happened to be there and was like, "Hey, did you see that I've got everything set up in the back?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, but let me go look." And so my $11 dice purchase turned into like $160 worth of games. and minis and stuff like that. But I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
but it was
phenomenal
worth more than
deals.
$160. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, basically 50% off. So yeah, it was about
Yeah.
$300 worth of stuff. So
Yeah, that's not bad.
yeah, it was ridiculous. Jason, I think, went even crazier than I did, but he got a lot of. There was younger kids stuff, so he got some stuff for like birthday birthdays over the summer type things too. So
Yeah, it's a good
yeah,
idea.
so that was fun.
Yeah.
And then I'm almost done with the game room bar area. Beer is officially flowing as of this weekend. I
Nice.
still have to finish the rest of the countertop and then some other finish work and building some drawers. But yeah, pretty much all done, or at least I would say 80% done.
Nice.
So now I'm kind of looking at my ugly shelves that are kind of temporary right now and trying to figure out what I want to do about storage. So, especially after seeing your pictures where everything was all nice and neat, and I'm like, oh,
Well,
now I got it.
it's not as nice and neat currently because I keep adding more stuff. Also, the plastic shelves, like our basement is amazingly uneven, and so the plastic shelves, like some of them are like leaning a little bit one way or the other, and it's fine. It does the job. It keeps things off the floor, but it's not necessarily super fancy. I don't know.
It looks clean. That's why, like right now, I've got kind of stuff. Admittedly, some stuff's moved just because I didn't want to get dust on them, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's definitely some needs for improvement. Everything's kind of just piled on top of one another. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've been going through that myself with the basement, but yeah, I
yeah,
did get to
speaking of
do.
basements,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I got to, in between basement cleaning time, I did get to do a little bit of kit bashing done here and there. I, hmm, I basically I'm trying to build a character for one of the kind of indie skirmish games that I like to play, and they don't have a model line, so you just use whatever you like. And so I've been kit bashing different models for that game, and I didn't have anybody so far in any of the war bands that I built for him who were in power armor. So I wanted to have somebody who was in power armor because that's a classification in the game. It's pretty powerful stuff.
okay,
So I thought, well, I'll take some, Games Workshop Space Marine power armor and try to grind off all the normal Space Marine Games Workshop stuff, which is to say skulls. And I
yeah,
cut away a lot of that stuff and everything. And I wanted I wanted this not to be a Space Marine. I wanted this to be a mercenary in power armor, and so I wanted her to be a
okay.
woman as well. And so I had some female heads that are actually made by Games Workshop for the Stormcast
Yep,
Eternals, and so they're made by Forge World, which is like a division of Games Workshop. Anyway,
yeah,
I picked them up at a convention, so I was like, okay, I want her to be a woman, and I did some other stuff and some modifications, and I'm just not happy with the way that she's holding the gun, and so
okay.
I want to. It's kind of like I've like built myself into a corner because I like did it, and then now I've like it's all stuck together, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, ah. So now I
Oh,
honestly kind of want to go back and like see if I can like disassemble it almost to some degree. There's this
would you?
stuff that's called debonder.
Okay, so
Uh,
yeah, yep,
yeah, which honestly, when you smell it, it smells like nail polish remover, which is probably what it is. But it helps to get rid of the CA glue, the super glue, and then because if you take I thought about taking the entire model and just putting it in the freezer, but then all the joints get kind of loose. So
sure.
I just want this gun to come off and then see if I can swap a different gun on there. So anyway, I'm going to mess with that a little bit more, but that's been one of the things that I've been kind of working on in between basement cleaning. I've been making more headway into the basement again, thanks to my lovely wife. Um, my desk at the back of the basement is really starting to take shape. It's like the space got cleared out, everything got put down, the desk got set down, and it's like two of those like kind of IKEA cabinets, and then just an
Okay,
IKEA like a tabletop, like a 78 inch tabletop across it, um,
okay,
or desktop really, because it's only maybe 24, 26 inches deep, but it's like 78 inches long. Um, and so that's all set up and everything. I've started putting things on the desk and whatnot. And then I hung a TV off the ceiling because I'm going to be using that for playing PlayStation 4 and stuff like that right
okay.
down there as well. But it's huge. It's like, well, it's like a 55 inch TV that I hung off of the ceiling. And it worked surprisingly well, honestly. So that's kind of cool.
So did you buy special stuff for that, or do you build your own kind of like?
No, yeah, I bought a thing on Amazon for like, it was, I don't even think it was $30, but it is super heavy duty, and I just screwed it into the main. Not even a joist. It's like the main beam that holds up the house in the middle of, it's like this huge, it's like a,
oh yeah.
I don't know. It's got to be a foot by a foot or something like that, and so just screwed it into that, and it's relatively close to the wall too. So it's not, I'm always concerned about hanging something heavy from a joist or something like that in the basement, because I just am, afraid that over a decade or two, it's going to start to sag or something, but this is so close to the wall that it's not going to be a problem. Also, that TV is really not, for being so big, it's really not that heavy. So, but yeah, that's all set up. I've got Ethernet cable that just showed up literally this morning from Amazon that I'm able to run some wired internet down there. And I've got a switch and all that jazz set up so that I can, do all the stuff that I want to do. And I'm going to start streaming like on Twitch and things like that down there as well. I've been doing some streaming on Twitch off of the PlayStation just for fun. And I hit affiliate status earlier this week. And
nice.
so
what is that? Like, how many do you have to have for that?
So with affiliate status, you have to have at least 50 followers. You have to stream, I think, 7 times in a 30-day period. You have to do X amount of hours, and I forget how many hours in that same 30-day period. And you have to have, I think, a minimum of, I think, an average minimum average, whatever, of like 3 viewers per session. So I hit the last milestone, I think, on Sunday. Yeah, I think it was Sunday. And so then they sent the email and said, hey, so I went through the paperwork, or, well, it's not real paperwork, it's online, but I went through all that stuff and signed up and everything. So now, being an affiliate, now people can subscribe to the channel. There's all kinds of other things that are opened up. I get access to emotes, so I can custom make emotes. Subscribers can then get access to those emotes so they can use them, and it's a whole thing. Twitch is a very interesting and different kind of ecosystem than YouTube that I'm used to. But I wanted to start working on Twitch just to sort of branch out a little bit. I've been watching a lot of videos, and there's a lot of people who are like who do a lot of like talk about streaming in general, and it's interesting to hear them all say that if they really wanted to, YouTube could just crush Twitch in like a minute. Well, maybe not that fast, but like very quickly. Like, it seems like, because there's so many people who use YouTube and they already have streaming, they just don't really emphasize it. And if they did and decided they wanted to get serious about it, Twitch would be in a bad place quickly. So I'm glad that I'm currently kind of on both. I think diversification is always a good idea, but anyway, so that's all stuff that I've had in the back of my mind. And then I've also been, I finished my Warcry terrain. It's all done. And now I'm trying to kind of build lists, again, partially in my mind, for Warcry, so that I can put together, some models to play with. I did actually see a video this morning, from someone who went through and did, like, they had a huge spreadsheet and had done a bunch of math on Warcry, and they showed which armies are like more powerful versus less powerful. And I'm assuming that they knew what they were talking about. I don't know all of that stuff very well, but I did notice that like the 3 armies that I like the most were all at the bottom as far as power was concerned, which seems pretty much par for the course. So again, I'm not playing competitively, not trying to get into tournaments, so it doesn't bother me that much. But it was funny that like all of those armies, like the Nurgle, Rotbringers, the Night Haunts, and the Iron Golems, all 3 of those armies in Warcry were all literally right almost at the bottom of the list as far as like, because he's averaging like movement speed and, power and all these different things and whatnot and everything. And then,
so like basically stuff that he thinks are important.
Well, I mean, they are all numerical things. They're all things that you can look at and go,
might be like, oh, movement's not that. I mean, I'm guessing he has some kind of formula.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know exactly what the formula would be, but there must have been one that would take a bunch of things into consideration. He didn't really touch on that so much, but he showed like he basically was just screen casting the the spreadsheet and everything like that, so you could see what was going on, and it was interesting. But I was just like, well, let's Now, admittedly, the number one army was Skaven, which I did just recently get the cards for, and I have some random Skaven around. So if I do want to maybe build a Skaven army at some point for Warcry, I could, and then they would maybe be overpowerful, and then everybody would dislike me. So I'm not a game designer, but I would kind of think that you would try to make these armies so they were relatively equal. But according to this guy, that was not the case. So we'll see. Again, like I said, I'm playing for fun and casual. So my wife and we can play, and it'll be okay. So so that's pretty much what I've been doing with my hobby. And it's been, I don't know, it's been productive. I've been glad to keep doing stuff. You've been doing stuff as well, but I think it's with this whole virus thing, I think it's helped me at least to get more done, just because I'm generally kind of at home a lot.
It's kind of the routine. That's like, I know you usually go out on Fridays. Like I usually have like the Wednesdays I'm doing stuff, so yeah.
Well, and you got a lot of stuff with the kids and sports on the weekends too, usually.
Right. So like all that's just kind of given more time. Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to find other ways to, keep yourself occupied or whatever. And I've never had an issue with that, but it's just now that I'm looking for other ways to keep myself occupied, I've got more things I can do. And, so I think that's why you're seeing people who are, trying more, kind of online gaming like you guys are doing with the Imperial Assault, and people who are starting to get more, like if I've seen people who are just like, I'm going back through all of my board games and I'm figuring out which ones I should try to sell, which ones need to be reorganized, which ones I might want to buy an expansion for, or just like making a database or a spreadsheet, stuff that you're like, you put off because you're like, oh, I got other stuff to do. And well, now you got time. And so I don't know. It's obviously, in the grand scheme of things, we would prefer not to have this pandemic, but since we do, I think it's best if you do try to use the time as you can. It makes sense.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Let's see here. We've got a question this episode.
We do have a question. Yeah. This one comes to us from Ben. Ben writes, "Hi, Matt and Adam. An aspect of hobbying that I've really gotten into recently is repurposing and kit bashing miniatures. Do you have any general tips or insights for making kit bashing easier? Keep up the great job with the podcast. Thank you."
So that's kind of going back to what I was just talking about when I was talking about my kit bashing stuff. For people who haven't heard the term before, kit bashing is when you take, it comes from back in the day when people would take different model kits. Like the famous thing would be to take like a World War II tank and let's say a World War II battleship, and those two things would be very different scales from each other. The tank might be, 8 inches long, and the battleship might be only a foot long, but in the real world, the differences would be quite extreme. And so therefore you could take parts off the battleship, let's say maybe those big, huge, 15-inch guns or whatever. And then you could put them on the side of your cool tank, and then they would look like they were smaller machine guns. And so you're bashing these two kits together, not literally because that would probably just break things, but you're bringing these parts together. So in the world of, let's say, miniatures, wargaming miniatures, kit bashing is a lot of like, I'm going to take the shoulder pads from this guy and the head or helmet from this person and put this different gun on there and make a very different model. It's like not following the instructions, basically.
Yep. So you can kind of get your own unique sculpt.
Exactly. And you can go beyond like just normal basic kit bashing, which is just putting different parts on. You can decide, okay, well, I'm going to actually do some sculpting. You can use different types of epoxy putties and things like that. 2-part putties, like what they call green stuff, because it's yellow and blue and you mix it together and it turns green. And so you can use that stuff to sculpt and modify and tweak things. But it's also helpful sometimes just to be like, I'm going to make this guy, but I'm going to put a different gun on him and a different helmet. And that, from a different company or something like that. And it totally changes, the way that the model looks. So do you have any general tips or insights for making kit bashing easier is the question.
Right.
I mean, one of the things is to start small.
Okay.
And so in that situation, my what I'm saying is basically just do some some head swaps to sometimes start. I've built a couple of different war bands for a game called Star Breach, which is kind of an indie sci-fi skirmishy game. And I used a lot of models that are from Games Workshop's Necromunda line, which is this sort of, it's not post-apocalyptic. It's basically kind of like gang wars in the very lower parts of all the big, huge hive cities that they're all over the Imperium. So a lot of the folks in these war bands look a little post-apocalyptic. So I've used a bunch of those bodies and then just swapped different heads, either from other GW kits, which sometimes works, but there's also plenty of companies out there that sell just heads. Like they just, they sculpt and make their own heads with the idea that you're going to use them for kit bashing. Yeah, they're bits. And so they are basically like usually resin. A lot of the companies seem to be from Poland for some reason.
Interesting.
And so, like there's a bunch of great ones and they do really nice work and you just find them online and you can just go through, like there's a company called Puppets War from Poland and they've got just dozens and dozens and dozens of different types of heads and they're constantly making new ones. And now they just 3D sculpt them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you use resin? So you said resin, most of the heads are resin, but a lot of the models are plastic. So does that cause issues like mixing mediums?
No, not at all. I mean, once you've painted it, you don't really notice the difference. The only issue that there ever is with resin is that you should technically try to wear some sort of mask when you are cutting it, sanding it, stuff like that, because the resin particulate, if it gets into your lungs, can be an irritant. And so that's no fun. Okay. So anytime that you're working with resin, right? Yeah, well, generally, yes. Like really tiny pieces like that, like heads, it's not as important. But if you ever get like a bigger resin piece, like a terrain piece or a vehicle, something like that, then it's definitely important to clean it just with basically just water with just a touch of dish soap in it, and then just I usually scrub it a little bit with like a old toothbrush or something like that, because they sprinkle this powder inside the mold that's called mold release, and it's kind of like like when you're baking and you use Pam, you spray Pam on the pan so you can get the muffins out, and they'll just slide out of the pan. At least that's the theory. It's like that. They basically sprinkle this powder on the inside of the mold so that when it's time to take the resin out of the rubber mold, that it'll actually separate from the mold. So, but then if you've got that stuff on the surface of the model and then you put primer or paint on it, then it'll flake off. So that's an important thing too when you are working with resin, certainly, is you generally kind of want to try to wash it a little bit, and you also want to try to wear a mask a little bit, or something, even just like a rag, so that you don't get particulates in your throat. So, but nonetheless,
anything with with doing like metal bits.
Metal bits, like you don't have to worry about the fragments particularly because they're pretty heavy because they're metal.
Okay.
And they also, I mean, I've never had to try to clean. The only time I've ever had to clean a metal miniature is if it's pretty old, because sometimes they will get kind of oxidized almost a little bit in there.
Yeah.
And you just want to kind of clean that off quick before you start priming. Again, just a little soap and water is fine. But as far as kit bashing, like I said, start small with just like some head swaps, maybe a gun swap. You do want to try, if you can, to get some get some stuff to practice on. Go on to eBay and pick up like bits or some other kits where it's like an incomplete kit maybe, but you can like use these parts from it. And if it's an incomplete kit, it's probably going to sell for pretty decent, for pretty cheap.
Right.
And then you want to have some clippers. You want to have an X-Acto blade. You want to have some little files and things like that. Sometimes you've got like an arm that's holding a gun and you just want the gun. You don't care about the arm because you want to glue that gun onto a different arm. It takes a while sometimes to clip away and to kind of chip away all the parts of the arm and just leave the gun behind. But you can do it. Obviously when you're using X-Acto, be careful. Don't cut towards yourself, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Another big thing though, I think for that sort of thing for kit bashing is to try to visualize as much as you can. Like I was mentioning earlier about how like I've built this model now and I don't like the way the gun looks. it was a gun from a completely different manufacturer, and it's just kind of odd in comparison to the rest of the model, and it's just not working. And at first I thought it was just because it's not the normal gun that this model would carry, and so it's like a change issue, like that. Maybe that was what was bumming me out, and I was just looking at it and going, that just doesn't look right, because it's not actually the right gun for that model. But I think it's something else, and I still can't quite put my finger on it, so I'm trying to figure that out. But like I said, I think I'm going to end up swapping that arm, or I'm going to hopefully see if I can just get the gun to separate and then put a different gun on. But, getting that stuff figured out ahead of time, if you can try to visualize it that way, helps. One way to help visualize when you're kit bashing is to use poster putty. So you take like a tiny little piece of poster putty, maybe.
Yep.
And use it to stick the arm onto the body, so you can see like the position, or maybe stick the gun onto the hand, or stick the shield onto the forearm, or whatever, so you can kind of visualize it without having to start gluing things together. If you use a little bit of poster putty or something like that to hold it and go, okay, well, that's maybe, I want this position. I've set things up with poster putty a little bit, and then taken pictures with my phone, so that when I'm gluing it back together and I've got rid of all the poster putty, I can remember, oh, that's right, I wanted this to be up higher, or I wanted this to be over like that. So it's interesting when you start to build something that's not the way it's supposed to be built. It does take a bit more work, but it's fun. That kind of stuff is important, figuring those things out, going kind of slowly, and again, like I said, starting small. Just do some head swaps and some gun swaps. If you want to get into the whole concept of like, well, I want to start sculpting like a cloak on or something like that using different putty and all that kind of stuff, that gets pretty high level pretty quickly. So it's important to sort of take some baby steps in there. I think one of the most important things, and this is going to be real short, have a lot of bits to choose from. If it's very hard to do kit bashing if you don't have any kits to bash, so any time that you get any whatever it's a kit of Space Marines, or it's a kit from Malifaux or anything like that, many different kits usually give you options. They will be like, oh, well, you can either have a guy be a shotgun guy, or a lightsaber guy, or it might be somebody who carries two pistols. You build one model using, let's say, the shotgun, but then you have those other options left around. You don't throw those in the garbage. You put those into something. You cut them off the sprue, put them into little dividers and those little plastic clear, things for jewelry or whatever that you can get at the dollar store, and just hold on to them, because at some point you're gonna be like, I'm just looking for something better for this person's cloak, just something to hang off of it. And you start digging through all your bits, and then you find something that you can modify or just use straight up, and that's it. Holding on to that stuff is important. So, So yeah, I hope that helped out, Ben. And we appreciate you asking a question for us, and we will reach out to you and send you the official limited edition GameFor Podcast T-shirt. Thanks for sending the question. And we'll reach out to you soon so we can get your address and send it out. Things are going a little slowly in the print-on-demand clothing world. We've noticed that recently. Some of the companies are taking up to 3 weeks to be able to produce. So we want people to be safe, and we understand that. But that's just something to think about as well. All right, let's see here. We're about to go into today's topic, but first, I want to talk to you a little bit about TurboDork. Have you been looking for a way to make your miniatures stand out on the tabletop? TurboDork is a radical line of metallic and TurboShift paints that will make your gray world colorful. TurboShift paints change colors as you move your models around and are great for spell effects, visors, weapons, and much more. Or let's say you wanted to make your minis look truly metal but colorful. Check out their metallic paints with colors like People Eater Purple, Spicy Meatball Red, and All That Glitters Gold. I'm going to be using my TurboDork paints I've mentioned a couple of times, for my Tau stealth suits. Once I decide to finally paint those guys up, they're all built for Kill Team and ready to go, but I want to get them just right. And I'm also looking to, we talked a little bit about kit bashing. just painting models very differently than you're usually used to seeing them could also
Right.
definitely do something like that. Using like so frequently, like let's say Space Marines in general, you use the Space Marine armor. It's usually like blue or red or dark green or something like that.
Right.
But if you wanted to go like really crazy metallic or something like that, that would definitely make it look different than a normal Space Marine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. If you need to add some color to your tabletop life, TurboDork has you covered. Check with your local retailer or hit the TurboDork website at www.turbodork.com. And thank you to TurboDork for sponsoring the Game4 podcast. You can also find that link down below in the show notes or in the YouTube description.
Excellent. Thanks again. All right. So our topic today.
Yeah.
Becoming a GM or GMing for the first time, or I guess becoming a GM is really kind of the game master. Is really kind of the goal here, not just necessarily running it one time and never doing it again, but kind of getting it, started and kind of getting into a rhythm.
Now, is there a difference between a GM and a DM?
I think most people, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure DM is just generally associated with Dungeons and Dragons as a dungeon master.
So dungeon master versus game master.
Right. And I think people just kind of use GM so that it's a little bit more abstracted from that. As kind of a general term. Like all DMs are GMs, but not all GMs are DMs.
Oh, nice. All right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So, but yeah, and I'm going to probably just focus on kind of like your typical D20, like dice, that's 20-sided dice systems before, because there are definitely, when we're talking about some like at the indie games and stuff like that, there are some crazy rules and stuff out there that, it could be completely different, and none of this stuff is really helpful. But so I kind of wanted to kind of put that caveat out there that I'm not going to cover how to be a GM for every type of game. This is kind of just your general D20s. But I think some of this stuff can go from there.
You're focusing on, probably the largest part of the industry, like
by far,
the Wizards of the Coast style 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and some of the things that kind of branch off from their Pathfinder and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, and even some of the like your Alien RPG, and there's definitely other ones that are kind of taking that to that same level.
But the indie style kind of like RPGs are probably maybe best if you're going to be a GM for that. It's better to maybe have a little bit of experience under your belt. Would you say that?
I would say, that would probably be a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
These are probably a little bit easier because there's a lot of material out there for you, and they're a little bit more structured. So it should be a little bit easier to run.
Sure.
So I would say that the one thing that I'm going to put out there as kind of like the golden rule is that you're playing a game. So the goal is to have fun. So, you can be, completely by the book rules, or you can be kind of lax with the rules, or read like if you're doing a pre-generated campaign, you can be focused exactly on what you're writing, or you kind of go off on your own. Everybody's style is going to be different, but the main thing is just make sure that everybody's having fun. If everybody's having fun, you're doing it the right way, whatever way that is. So don't fear, don't go watch Critical Role and go, I have to be Matt Mercer, incarnate, have voices and all this stuff. Don't worry about doing that. Just, make sure everybody's having fun.
Well, everybody has their own style. And then also, because maybe you don't do the voices, you know what I mean?
Right.
But you can, if you want to, if that's your thing, but you could still run a good game without that kind of stuff. And again, Matt, this is not his first rodeo, Matt Mercer. He's been doing it for a long time, so you can't expect yourself to. Yeah, you can't expect yourself to go to that level like right from the get.
So then another tip, if possible, run this with kind of your friends, your gaming group, brothers, sisters, family. So just people that will kind of help the anxiety a lot. Don't try going to a convention your very first time and running a game. Certainly you could, but I think that would be a really steep step to try to get up onto.
Yeah,
So
that's a pretty uphill battle there to have your very first time be like some convention with a bunch of people you don't know at all. Yeah, I could easily see that.
yeah, and I mean, not everybody has a group they can play with, but yeah, I would say if you can have at least some people in your group that it will kind of help you out a little bit, to be able to kind of give honest feedback, and it's a little bit more forgiving of an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so another good tip is to look at so pre-generated campaigns. So basically, off the shelf that you buy, they don't necessarily have to come. Like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons from Wizards, there's certainly a lot of companies out there that just make campaigns.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that work with
s
Dungeons and Dragons.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
or even the other systems that you're looking at. And even if you're like, I don't really want to play a pre-gen, at least read through some. Like, read
Mm.
through 3, 4 different pre-generated campaigns, especially like if you're looking for, uh, look for ones that are kind of maybe, if you're just kind of looking at the style, look for ones that are, come highly rated, or people have talked about. And the reason why I say all this is so that you can, even if you're creating your own world, you'll kind of get an idea of what you need to prep. You know, what stuff you need to know that's in the rooms. How are the rooms going to be? Or the adventure. How is that all going to be tied together?
I mean,
Um,
it's hard to discover all of this in a vacuum. Like if you've never done this before, you've played some RPGs before, but you've never been a DM or GM or whatever. You've never been
right.
looking particularly at that side of the dungeon master screen. You know what I mean? You've always been
Yeah.
looking at the side with the pretty artwork on it, not the side with the charts and the stats and all the information. So it's yeah, I could easily see there being something that even if you aren't going to run this adventure because it's some pre-generated adventure that everybody knows about, at least getting ideas from it, I think, does definitely help. Yeah.
hmm And then if you are running the pre-gen, I would say you're going to want to read that through at least twice.
Hmm.
For me, I usually will read it kind of like at like a 10,000 foot level. So kind of very high level, kind of reading through, just getting a general feel for what's going on in the campaign, what the overall arcing stories are. And then usually what I'll do is then kind of break it up so that I'm, you know, uh, that session or at least a few sessions ahead, so everything's fresh in my mind. Because
Sure.
a campaign, some of the pre-gen campaigns can take a year, 2 years to run, depending on how often you're playing.
Yeah.
So you'll have to refresh yourself, but make sure that you're not reading for the first time, because a lot of there might be stuff that you're like, oh well, that doesn't really matter if they skip this, and then find out that later on that's a huge part of the story. So understanding kind of what the goal of that campaign is super helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you want to you mean there's always the jokes going around about how the PCs, the player characters, will always derail your story and derail your plans, but it's still you want to still have those plans. It makes sense.
Yeah, and for the most part, when you're doing pre-gen, there will be times when they kind of can go off on a tangent, but there are some kind of like loose rails where you can kind of hook them back into the story.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and definitely don't feel like you can't go outside that either. Again, this is just a guideline to help you get going. If they are if an NPC shows up that they're really interested in, and it still works within the story, play off of that. Let them, maybe build your own little hook, to go back into it.
Hmm.
Um, and that might be a good way to kind of start getting in from the pre-gen to kind of rolling your own, is starting to do, sort of like we were just talking with kit bashing. It's just you're still slowly adding new elements to it. There's a lot of good stuff on, I'm trying to think, the online Dungeon Masters Guild online,
Okay. Sure.
uh, that are just, they call them, supplements, where like I've got a book that I got from a company that is just ends. So it's taverns and ends, and it's got stuff in there like the signature drinks and some games, that you could actually play that have been play tested. some NPCs and stuff that, if they're for whatever reason needing to go to a tavern, and I don't have something ready for that, I can go and get some ideas from that and pull some elements in.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that helps.
I mean, I
you
know
don't have to do that right away, but having that to pull from is usually nice.
back in the D20 days, back when like 3.5 and that kind of stuff, Dungeons and Dragons was out there. I remember that there were lots of companies that were creating D20 content that was, like they would create like a PDF that would be like 12 pages long, and it would be like, 18 magical shields, and they would be these inexpensive PDFs you could buy for a couple of bucks that would give you a bunch of things that you could then just drop into your kind of campaign. Is there still stuff like that much with 5th edition?
Yeah. Yep. There's stuff like that. You can search for free stuff online. Dungeon Masters Guild is great for PDFs. If you sign up for their weekly newsletter, there's usually an item free of the week that you get that you can download for free. And then if you like it, you can still give money back to that person that did it. You kind of like almost a try before you buy. But they've got stuff from 29, 39 cents all the way up. Another nice thing that they do is like when I was running the first version, the first part of the campaign I'm doing right now, the Dragon Heist. It was a little bit more of a complicated campaign because it was a little bit more fluid, and they had kind of different options of how you could run it, and kind of got overwhelming for me. And I went on there and found actually somebody had gone and done basically DM notes that kind of broke it out so that it was like almost like a quick reference. So I didn't have to go through 30 pages back and forth to try to figure out where I was at. It kind of gave me a list of, okay, here's all the monsters that they're going to, company that they can encounter this chapter. Here's some of the treasury they can be looking at. Here's the important NPCs and their names, and a quick little like, this is so and so who owns the end, and this is why they're in the story type thing. So that 2 chapters from now, and they're like, what was that that storekeeper's name? I can flip back real quick and look at that. So it kind of gave me a quick idea. And then I also liked it because it kind of helped me understand better how to keep my own notes, like of what style I liked and what parts of that I like to do that I kind of wanted to do myself, and what parts I was like, oh yeah, that's just noise and I don't need that.
Yeah, I think that it's a because role playing games are basically infinite as far as storytelling is concerned, it can be daunting to try to just like be given such a huge blank canvas and then expected to come up with stuff. So being able to take a look at some of these other things and have these different resources out there, they not only help to give you something to use when you don't have the particular creative skill set, to be able to build it yourself, they can also just kind of like spur on your creative juices to get you to come up with something that's maybe inspired by that, but it's specifically designed for your campaign. I mean, it's a very interesting, like, almost like a case study, because it's so difficult difficult's not the right word. I think it can be very daunting to people who are new at it, to try to figure out, like, okay, now I run the entire world and all of existence, and now how am I going to do that? Yeah, especially if you're used to being, you've been playing for a while when someone else is being a GM.
Yeah, no, the first time I was doing it, I was kind of like, oh, okay, everybody's staring at me and expects me to do it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's helpful though. I mean,
but you can do it.
Yeah, you can do it. It's that's why I said your friends, they'll be forgiving. Half the time they're just glad they're not the ones doing it, so you almost get the sympathy vote of like,
sure,
they're
yeah,
running it.
Yeah.
And then obviously don't go out and buy $1,000 worth of minis and buildings and trains and reference cards and everything under the sun to start with.
I'm not sure what you're talking about there. I don't know how that works.
I've read that this is what you're not supposed to do. I
right.
Know that I'm
that's
guilty
important.
of doing it too. But
sure. Yeah.
But yeah, buy the stuff that you that you find that you need versus buying stuff to force yourself to use. I know I've done some stuff where I'm like, oh, that would be kind of fun. I just buy it, and then later on found I don't really need that, and now it's just a waste of a purchase. Versus there's some stuff I've bought that I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, this is exactly what I needed because like I've got little plastic templates that give me different like spell radiuses that I can lay down on maps, and it's so much nicer for us to be able, like, for long effects, for us to know, when characters enter or exit a zone, or who's involved in, who's getting a fireball in their face.
Right. Yeah.
So that I found was useful, but I didn't, again, didn't buy it. And beforehand, I was just, use a marker or whatever to kind of map out where they are. And that worked fine. So this was just a thing to kind of speed it up. But definitely not a requirement.
Sure.
Speaking of requirements, so kind of a list of materials that are definitely kind of required if you're going to be running. One, obviously have your reference materials. So for Dungeons and Dragons, that's not just your player's handbook, which everyone really should have, but also your Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. Even if you're buying like a pre-gen campaign and you bought those materials, usually you'll still need the Monster Manual and DM Guide as well. Not everything is in there.
Right.
Sometimes they'll say like you'll have a box and it says everything's included. Especially like starter sets and stuff like that. But normally you'll have to have kind of the base supplements. So kind of
starter sets are a relatively limited scope as far as the experience that you can have. Yeah. And so they're not bad ways to start. Honestly, that's why they make them. But it is, if you want to even get into like a little bit more beyond that, then it becomes a situation of having to make a bit of an investment on some of the books and stuff like that.
Yep. And just because you have all the materials doesn't mean you have to memorize all the materials.
No.
There are many times that I've had to look stuff up. There's some stuff where I've got bookmarks in my materials so that I can reference it, because right now my players, they own their own tavern, and so every 10 day they get some kind of income, or they lose money on the business depending on, but there's a whole way to figure that out. And I definitely don't have that memorized. Like, I have a general idea of what it's got to do, but I've got to reference that every time. And only every 2 or 3 campaigns does it ever come into play. So just make yourself bookmarks, or look up the glossaries. Sometimes doing a Google search is fast, especially for like weird rule scenarios.
Sure.
I've gotten good at looking that up. Usually if you start with what system you're using, so Pathfinder or D&D 5th edition, usually that's D&D 5e. And then your question, you can usually find it relatively easily of other people having, like, if this person is under this effect and this other person tries to do X, how does that play out?
Right.
Those kind of like weird edge cases that doesn't normally happen, but you kind of are curious how to do it. But at the same time, don't feel that you have to go look it up and do it the exact right way. Again, it's about having fun. If you're Googling stuff every 5 minutes, it slows the game way down.
Right.
So sometimes you just kind of go, yeah, this kind of makes sense. We'll just do it this way. And you make your ruling and you move on.
Yeah. I'm assuming you want to have dice as well.
Dice are usually a good thing, especially if it's a dice system, which like the D20s are. Normally, not only do I like to have my dice, but I usually have an extra set or two. I just kind of I have a little box of all of my old dice and stuff I got at conventions and variety.
Maybe somebody forgets their dice at home or something like that. Or
someone forgets it, or they're for whatever reason, like there's a certain spell they have to roll 3 of a certain die. It speeds it up if they can just grab from the kind of the potluck dice and roll.
Sure.
So it helps out with the speed, and also, like you said, there's times when people are like, oh shoot, I forgot my dice, and now you don't have to cancel the session or have to wait for them to pass the dice around.
Right.
They can just kind of grab from the pool, and then usually some sort of screen. I actually use like the D&D uh, uh, GM screen.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the systems ones are nice because they'll have a lot of common items that
Yeah.
and references right there for you to look at. You can also
And
make your own.
yeah, because the thing is about the screen is it's number one, it's helpful because it usually has a lot of charts on the inside that you have to refer to sort of frequently. But the
Hmm.
real use of the screen is for the GM to be able to kind of hide things a little bit,
Right. Yeah.
right?
If you're
Like
looking at
like dice
maps,
rolls and
maps
maps
and
and
dice
maybe
rolls.
certain notes and things like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's one thing for someone to, when they're rolling their die, it's a different feeling from rolling your die and giving the number to the GM and the GM saying, "Oh, you hit," versus going, I need to hit a 13 and I'm rolling. You
Right.
know, if you know what you're having to roll first, it kind of loses some of the theatrics. Not to say I
Mm-hmm.
don't sometimes will go, this is what number you're trying to hit. But you can kind of let them guess, don't say, "Oh, this guy's got 3 hit points left." Say, "Oh, he's looking pretty, pretty beat up right now.
Yeah.
He's kind of clinging to life." Try to take something. Even though it's a numbers based game, usually try to take the numbers back out of it when
Yeah.
interacting, just so that it gives the story a little bit more context and flavor. And then sometimes you'll fudge numbers. Um, if any of my players are listening right now, I'd never fudge numbers. That's
Never.
just something I've heard about. But
Yeah.
no, but sometimes a battle's going like really hard for them, and they're not having fun, or sometimes it's going way too easy. Sometimes a number, especially if it's like close, like say they needed a 13 to hit,
Mm-hmm.
and they rolled a 12, and they're like one off, but they haven't hit all night. They're getting kind of discouraged. Maybe they get a glancing blow or something like that, like, and you have to damage on your side, but you kind of give them a small win. You can kind of play around with it a little bit. Again, you're trying to make it a fun time, not necessarily playing exactly to the rules. Rules are more of a guideline, like the pirates.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. If it's not pirate rules, they're more guidelines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and then if so, those are kind of the base ones. And then I kind of a list of like helpful stuff. Um, I've got notes. I've got notes on here twice. I realize, but there's kind of two different types of notes. But that just kind of gives you an idea of how important notes are to me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't have to do it, but I really think these are helpful. Um, so one is notes like pre going into a session, kind of like I was talking about before, like having kind of a reference card of, any kind of story hooks that you might want to bring in, or hooks to kind of bring them back to the story if they get derailed. Like
Mm-hmm.
if they're off, sitting in a tavern and, you know, maybe the dragon that they were supposed to go fight is now starting to attack the town and then flies off and they've got to follow it or something. Find ways to bring them back to the story when you need to, or to kind of dive into something better. Just basically information, highlights, bookmarks, that kind of thing. Um, and then you're going to want it to super helpful to take notes during. Um, Matt Mercer's got a great YouTube video that kind of explains his mythology. But basically, like what it is, just kind of a way for you to reference stuff that's been added and done by you for your campaign, even if it's pre-generated. Not all NPCs have names. Maybe they talked to somebody that didn't have a name in the book. Well, write down that name. Write down that location. Um, what was the name of the bank they put all their money into?
Yeah.
So that you can reference that stuff later without going, "Oh, that bank or that person." You can actually use their name, and
Sure.
you can also then potentially bring those NPCs or storyline hooks back. Rather than later on, if so, a bank is getting robbed from, is it their bank or is it you can get some more personal investment by bringing stuff back. Um,
I mean,
Also, you can have some kind of like post-it notes or notebook paper that you can rip off to pass secret info to players.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it a lot, but sometimes there's stuff that the player will know that maybe they don't have to share with the group. Have
Sure.
some kind of way to communicate, or back and forth, when it's not the whole general group's information.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I mean,
and
it's
then
all
if
about
there's
building story, and that's like all of these little extra things, like knowing the name of the bank and being able to get one person to understand something that the rest of the group doesn't realize yet. These are the things, rather than just as the GM just sitting and just telling people, like having these things keeps. I think I personally have always felt in the few times that I've played role playing games, that type of stuff is what keeps me interested.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I always like to have the characters have something that when they make their characters that nobody else knows yet, that you can kind of draw from.
A hidden
Maybe
secret.
someone close to them died, and they're like, what is their passion? Why are they out doing stuff that you can then kind of pull from?
Mm-hmm.
You can get some really neat hooks pulled into that especially when you kind of like offhand reference it later on in the story, and only they catch it. But they're like, I know when I'm playing and a GM does that to me, and I'm like, oh, they're talking about my storyline right now. Like it
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
pulls you in right away.
yeah.
A grid system with markers or minis. Again, you can have just rips pieces of paper, but some kind of like the Chess X makes a grid. There's a lot of grid paper out there.
Mm-hmm.
You can use actual paper with a grid system like the large squares from your hobby store. So that when they're doing battles and stuff like that, it's a little bit easier to get like a spatial awareness around you.
And
Um,
you are these days, obviously, with the pandemic, you're using Roll20, correct?
yep.
And that gives you the ability to use basically kind of like a grid map, and instead of miniatures, you're using like little discs, or like, well, they're virtual discs. They're like little markers that you put on the
Yeah, they're
map to let you
actually
know where
little
this
sprite
guy is and
characters.
that skeleton
Yep.
is, and yeah.
Yeah, and they don't have to be fancy to start off with, but just
Mm-hmm.
a way for them to visually reference. Like sometimes just extra dice. If there's six skeletons, use six sided dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Again, eventually you'll probably want to get minis and stuff like that to kind of be more inclusive in the story, but don't do it right away. But
Yeah,
then
you don't
later
need it to
on,
start.
I can see that being a lot more helpful with the story.
Mm-hmm.
So. Um, Also, I was thinking about this too. There's definitely a difference between one shots and campaigns. Like I wouldn't say only run a one shot if you're going to start GMing. Again, a one shot is like basically is kind of a small adventure that's meant for. They usually have pre-generated characters or a way to a certain amount of like type of character they want you to create,
And it's played over
and
like just one session generally,
usually
right?
just one session,
Yeah.
versus a campaign where it's a growing story. They usually start at a lower level and kind of build up your character as you go.
And you
um,
play maybe like a 3 or 4 hour session, and then you come back together a week or two later and you just pick up where you left off, and it can go sometimes for years. There are plenty of people out
right.
there who've been playing certain campaigns for years, but a one shot is like a almost kind of like except without the dressing up and stuff like that. It's almost like those murder mystery like dinners, where you
Right.
everybody has kind of a role and you do a thing, and then at the end of the night it's over. It's one of those types of things, sort of, but
Yeah, it's
without,
difference
again,
between
without the
like
costumes.
difference between like a movie and a long running TV show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Both have their merits, but one kind of gets it all in that one hit, and another one kind of builds and has different arcs spanning over usually a general's arc, and then small arcs that maybe that arc is settled that that night or over a couple nights. And um, I would say I don't think that for me, I don't see running your first one being one versus the other. Both of them are unique enough that you're kind of going to be doing it for the first time on either. It's pretty
Right.
much going to be a reference thing. Like a one shot is nice because you don't have to worry about lasting effects. Like if you screw up and maybe you give a treasure that's too powerful, well, so what? We're starting something new next week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you don't really have to kind of recover from that. But at the same time, it's a lot harder to engage the story because there's not, all the investments, all the backstories, all those notes I was talking about earlier, where they met this NPC that's now suddenly come back, or, um, you know, they saved the town and now they found out that town's now under attack again. There's less investment from the players. So
Right.
I think both are useful. So I would say kind of do what you think feels best.
And I mean, really, in the grand scheme of things, it's about obviously trying to make it as fun as possible for the players, but you're also trying to have fun yourself as well.
Yeah, generally.
I mean, like
There's times,
if you
and
hate
it doesn't
doing it,
always happen.
right? Not
I
everybody can be a GM, I think, because not everybody is interested in being a GM. I mean, I think everybody can be one if they're interested in it. But I think if it's just not, if you don't want to be the creator, you don't want to do that stuff, you just want to be the player. That's that knowing that versus trying to force it, I think is probably actually a really good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, if you're kind of running it yourself, or even if you're doing a pre-gen, try to give as much variety as you can. If they just got done through a super long battle, now start doing some more role playing, or more stories. You know, don't I but don't, again, read the room. If your players really don't like to do role playing, don't force them to role play. Um, but if it generally they like it, everything, mix it up a little bit, so that stuff can kind of be driven along.
Mm-hmm.
um a great tip I've heard, I know it's been repeated by a number of people, is the what do you do hook too. Like, as you're explaining like the scenario, and you start talking about, okay, the dragon's coming down and he's attacking the town, and he's the tavern is on fire down the street, and you know one one kid sitting there lost, walking by you, he's looking for his mom. You
Mm-hmm.
start talking about all these little elements that are going around your players, and then you just do, what are you doing? you know
Right.
at that
Yeah.
point you just kind of like, okay, I set the scene for you guys, now you tell me what you're doing. Like, that's, at that point that kind of drives them to go, oh, okay, yeah, if I saw this is what I would be doing. Maybe the knight's going to go running down to fight the dragon, or maybe he's going to try to, the kid reminds him of himself when he was younger, and he's going to go try to help him reattach with his family. you know
Sure. Yeah.
what is the
I mean,
group? The group is going to be able to motivate itself.
that's the prompt. I mean, that's part of the GM's job. Number one is to explain what's going on, describe the world and the story and all that kind of stuff. But then also to kind of kick the PCs a little bit in the butt and say, all right, well, now what's your response? Like, how are you? You know what I mean? Like, that's all. The
Right.
interaction is the most important thing, but you do, as a GM, have to sort of steer it. That's
Right. You
something
don't.
to understand from the get go.
Yeah. Generally, you don't want to tell a person what their character is doing. You want
Correct.
them to tell you what their character is doing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you do that, you're going to have a good time.
Yeah. I think that, like, again, like I said earlier, like if you're, not everybody wants to be a GM, not everybody is like has that interest. I think that if you have the interest, I think you can do it. I don't think there's any reason, um, like, even if you're like, well, I really want to do it, but I'm not very creative, I have a hard time coming up with stuff. Like we mentioned, there's so many resources. You can run
Hmm.
pre-gens, you can take a bunch of pre-gens and squish them together. I mean, you can kit bash pre-gens, I mean, like you
Yep.
can just Frankenstein a bunch of stuff together and make your own world from just grabbing stuff from here, grabbing stuff from there. And eventually, like, the concept is that eventually you will probably get better at it and want to start doing your own stuff from scratch, but starting with a store-bought campaign and then moving into squishing some other stuff together from other campaigns and then moving into eventually doing your own thing from scratch is the way that a lot of GMs end up going. Like, that's the path for a lot.
Yep. Exactly. And
Yeah.
and GMing, even if you only do it once, gives you a more appreciation of what's going on that other side of that screen. So it gives you a better idea of like how you want your player, like what can you do as a player to help your GM's story, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's really helping everyone's story.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like, it's basically, I mean, it's like improv. It's a yes and, you know, don't,
mm-hmm.
you know, and keep building. You're building each other's stories as you go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's true. Well, I hope this helped folks that are thinking about becoming GMs and or DMs. And I think that, the world always needs more people to run the games in role-playing, because it's pretty much a one-to-many sort of situation. So we always need more folks to do that. There's probably, I'm sure that there are groups out there that are just all like fighting each other to see who has to be the GM, and so if it's something you like doing, there's no reason not to. So it is something you can do if it's something you're interested in.
Yeah, and if you've got tips, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, throw them in the comments in YouTube, or you can send them to us via an email. All right. Well, thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player, or you just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, to find out more about the GameFor platform designed to connect tabletop gamers, please check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.
Thank you.